Hi everyone. Thank you for tuning into this video. This video is part 2 of my conversation with Dwij Hirpara, who is a final year architecture student at CEPT. In part 1, Dwij shares his experiences studying at CEPT and goes through some of his works from the previous studios. He also shares his portfolio that he used to apply and get into Pritzker Prize winning architecture firm RCR Architects. Dwij shares his experiences traveling and living in Spain and also some memorable moments working at RCR Architects. For those who haven't watched part 1 of this conversation, click on the link provided in the description. If you like this content, spread the word by sharing this with your friends at school or colleagues at office. Once again, thank you for tuning in. Okay, so this segment of the podcast, we're going to talk about your recent studio project, which was tutored by Kaivan Mehta, and the studio was about time, public, and architecture. So we're gonna go through this project, and Dwij is gonna take us through the sequence and the progress and the design development of this project.
So the studio was basically, if I just tell you simply, it was basically categorized into three parts. The first was like to understand architecture and to understand meanings of its manifestation, to understand values and choices of an architect. The second part was the second part was understanding your community, your neighborhood, and it is a very dicey thing to do. It's not something that you can get on paper. So to understand an intimate environment, to understand a neighborhood, and third was to understand how we could develop an architectural language, and what are architectural elements that have such some meaning in a particular context. Yeah, so these were the three main things about time, public, and architecture.
We are gonna go through the design process and the sequence. Um,
Yeah, so I told you that the three categories, one of the categories is to understand architecture and its manifestation. So we in the first few weeks we basically discussed a lot of things about a role of an architect, the difference between values and choices of an architect, what is a constructed environment, what are the theories and language that interpret that atmosphere, things like that. So these discussions were then placed on a mind map, and it was something that we did for the first time. And mind maps were a good tool to express ourselves, what we understood from the discussions, and how would we structure the discussion out of it. So yeah, so these mind maps actually are the discussions that we did during while Kaiwan was actually introducing the studio to us. The second discussions was on time, and it's different, like the sense of movement and transition versus time as something which is what kind of a form does time have, like is it a circular thing, is it a mythological object or a memory. And so these were the things. Then we talked about what's public. So the three keywords that the studio has: time, public, and architecture. These discussions were based on that. And certain projects were discussed, and Kaiwan used to handpick conversations, some thoughts, and some projects that were really important to understand the importance of an architectural element. So yeah.
So multiple sessions on just mind map, and so how long was this process for, this mind mapping process?
Yeah, so the process was about a week or so, and you could see the amount of work versus the less time that we had, but we never realized it during the studio. We were just like, Kaivan was so enthusiastic to push us to do things, and this was just a week of work that we did.
Oh, this was just 1 week, the first week.
Yes, yeah, the first week.
So then you went to case study.
Yes. So as I told you that architectural elements have their own meanings in a specified context and time. So we took this Elements of Architecture, a book by Remkulas, OMA, and we studied specific elements. So we started with facades, and then the key ideas that we went through the book. There were many ideas in the book, and everybody had interest in many different ideas. So we were free to choose an idea, and then try to make like the assignment was to try to explain the book also and what you learned about it. So it could be like just a text, or it could be a graphic. So I decided to first take clippings from the book, try to understand where the story is taking me to, and I focused on key ideas, such as one you see is kinetic facades, the politics of control. And there were many things that I learned about, that the impact of mechanization on society and things like that. So these were the first sheet explains you how we went about through the book. Second sheet explains you that the key things that I took out, and I explored, I researched about it, and then I tried to express it in different ways. For example, mechanization brought in various different spaces and phenomenon of transition and things like that. So the second sheet was a mixture of both book and my thoughts and research. And the third sheet was about then understanding that how like the whole book is expressing itself from one topic to the other, and how could we link one topic to, let's say, something else, something more about, let's say, balconies or things like that. So how would one topic, one specific kinetic facade topic, would basically connect the whole history and the process of facades as an element. Yeah. So these were other topics I learned about: media facades, and yeah, from information to atmosphere, and then total vision as the all glass environment, and how it would relate with the future, and the vision of the future. Yeah, so we could just now skip. So these were like, we were supposed to choose 5 topics, and from those we would then reconnect all of them together, to make our own tools of understanding,
And
like our own design tools.
how long was this process for? The second stage was the case study, and you were supposed to choose 5 topics. So how long was this process for?
So Kaiwan thought that it would be for 1 week also, but we then stretched it to 2 weeks, because then he realized that we don't see a book as he thought we would. So actually, I learned many things from him. One of those was to read a book, to understand what it says and what I could learn from it, to make a design tool out of it. So yeah, so it was about 2 weeks.
So this is again coming back to
the case studies. Yes. So case studies about Stuttgart's museum and Starts Gallery and other projects. And yeah, they were very important things. They generated different discussions among us. So these were handpicked by Kaiwan, and he wanted to talk about them. He also made presentations on it. And then he gave us other case studies that we would work on, and then we had to make like a flashcard out of it, like something that can just tell me by an image and an text that what the key idea is about. So and it was all personal, so it was not a given thing, and we could just understand the project and then try to state its one of its key things that it expresses. So there were 7 case studies. Yeah, this was Park de la Villette.
so this was the third part of the study. The
Yes,
so this was again for another week.
yes, this was again for the another week. We discussed many things on each project. We had some like Kaiwan has many friends, so he brought in people to explain some projects, and yeah. So
So
and like
how are the
yeah.
discussions like? Would you have daily reviews, or was it like on the first day of the week you're given the assignment of what the particular agenda is for that particular week, and then on the second day you show some progress. On the third day you go for a review, and then you work. So how is it structured every week?
Yeah, so my friends told me to mention that whenever Kaiwan gave us an exercise, we would never understand it for the first go. Like we would play with it, we would try to make out what he's trying to say, and we would try to explain him in the first review. Then he would basically crash all of our thoughts, like not crash it, but basically he would try to explain the exercise. Then after giving us a certain guideline, he would then explain us the exercise, and then we would again go back, relook at what we have done, and then redo our things. So and the discussions in the studio were like a 5-minute discussion. So he would quickly go through everyone every day, like on three, like in 3 days of the week. He would go like it would be a 5-minute discussion, and then we would come back again. We would work, and then we would show him, like we would have another review again. So
Were these all printed out and pinned up?
yeah, so he liked us to have these things on hand, so that we feel as if it is a design tool for us, in terms of like what learnings did we do in, like in previous exercises. So yeah, these were printed.
So these were on A3 or A4?
Yeah, this was on an A3.
So each stage of the process was for a duration of 1 week, and then you would kind of conclude that, and you would move on to the next stage of the project.
Yes, yes. So it would run for a week. Any exercise would run for a week. We would be given, like indirectly, he would give us 2 days to think about what the exercise is all about. Then we would try to come up with uh, the like the stuff that he wants, and like the stuff that is required, and then he would explain it to us that okay, the exercise means this, and you have to shape your things like that. And he would never indulge into how we express ourselves in terms of anything, like even in mind maps or a flashcard. It would be like these so many tools, and like these are all on paper, but once you start working with them, you would realize that a flashcard is very different from a accordion book, let's say. So and then how you express yourself and your thoughts on it. So yeah, the structure of the exercise was precisely done, and and very thoughtful. And the work that we did was just uh, like an exploration that we did uh, during the studio.
So the next phase of the project is kind of like another case study here.
So you are in the neighborhood thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So the first category or the first segment of the studio, it was to understand architecture and its manifestation. The second was to understand your neighborhood. So then we started mapping out our neighborhoods. We started understanding what a neighborhood is. And some studios you would see that you have been given like a 1 kilometer radius or a 2 kilometer radius kind of a thing, and you just try to make that as the neighborhood. But in our studio, or like as Kaiwan said, like, or Kaiwan stated, that neighborhood is not something that you see as a complete object. It's something that you feel. Yeah. So we were given we were free to express and try to make a map out of it. So what I did was I took a Google map, and then what I did was that I started cutting out things that I didn't knew. I started mapping roads. Okay, this road, I've been there, I've been here. And for the first thing that I did was I started clipping out things that I never know. Yeah, or something that I don't understand as my town or my city or my neighborhood. And then the next step was to mark out activities. Now at first we never understood why activities, like why we should mark out a pan cigarette stall or a mechanic shop or something like that. Later we then realized during the process that these things actually make up our neighborhood. So our neighborhood is actually a network, and these networks are basically comprised of bigger activities and smaller activities. Smaller activities get like they get attracted by big activities. So if you have a, like, let's say a courtroom or something like that, you would have related smaller activities around it. Similarly, some other activity of a larger scale, you would see smaller activities get attracted to it, and that will comprise what you know as your neighborhood.
Then you did a small photo essay as well.
Yeah, then they were quick photo essays, and he wanted us to, like, he wanted us to explain what is the neighborhood by photographs. So I started taking photographs of things that I just notice in the neighborhood. Like, I wake up, I see something happening, I click a photograph and I move on. If I have to do some chores at home, I would take my camera with me and take a photograph, something like that. So yeah, so these were some photographs. We couldn't explain what we are trying to make out of it, or like because it was nothing like okay, a neighborhood is something like a courthouse or something like a factory or something like a specific thing. It was not something like that. So we started clicking photographs of many things that was in our neighborhood. Yeah. So these were some photo essays that we did. Yeah. So once we started mapping out these activities, the amount of activities that we could just realize by moving around, then we took specific activities. Like like the students were given a choice, and I chose to map street benches, garbage spots in the neighborhood, flour mills, mochi wala, food carts, things like that. So I took 5 activities. And now basically we were told to map the activity. Now everyone took it in a different sense. Personally, what I felt was that it was not about what were the dimensions of the activity, like what is the dimension of the plinth that gets out, or this example, is informal shit, sorry.
No,
It's
no,
an
no.
informal thing that happens in almost every town, that if you have a society and things like that where people live together, they have a plane that comes out to the road,
Yes.
and people play outside, and it's something that you see every day, but it's not something that is legal in thing, like that is something that is realized as something legal. But so it was not about like mapping out, okay, what are the dimensions of the plane, but it was about what objects comprise that environment that it is in. So for me it was important to map out that the road was so near, there were animals around, there were people playing around and things like that. So that's why, like, that's how I would recognize why that activity is there. Yeah. So yeah, similarly for a garbage spot it would be something similar, that I would understand why the plane or why the wall is so dirty, why it is there, or is it because that there is an abandoned land behind or something like that. And yeah, similarly for a mochi wala bhaiya, that even if you have street benches or something where people gather, these small activities happen to generate there. And there would be a chai stall wala nearby or something like that, people would be mapping around doing their own thing. Yeah. So yeah, and similarly for a food cart guy, like I like we used to, like, I went there and I personally talked with him. He told me that key things about his location is that there is like a street, like a speed breaker there, and so people basically slow down there. And then when the railway line is closed, people basically get out of their cars, grab something to eat, or they would sit around. People would gather in the evening to play music there, and so basically the whole thing for me personally, it was not given by Kaiwan, but for me personally was to map the environment that it sits in, rather than mapping, okay, what's the dimension and what are the smaller things that he has, like what are the vessels and things like that. Then we come to time objects, and the tutor basically gave us a few words that we could use to understand time, and we were free to add more words or more terminologies. But how would you understand, let's say, strange, something as strange as something that depicts time, or or shadow is a very easy thing to do. But let's say a garden or something that is hidden, how would you understand time as an object? Yeah. So the exercise basically was to break. So it was in two parts. First we would map out or click photographs of things that are very personal to us. So some things that I go through every day, like the one that you see right now is from my balcony, where I see the day passing by, or the when I get into the lift and I hear conversations from a different people that are around, or it's like a layer, and you hear something and then you forget about it. So these were things that was not directly related to the design process. It won't give me something to design for, but it would make me understand what time is, and how I could depict time maybe in when I'm designing. So yeah. So one of these example was, let's say, bodies. You would find these photographs of people who have passed by in every house, and it would be a very common thing. And even though you would still feel that photo frame different from something other. it is something that expresses time in itself. And you would still act differently around that particular photo frame versus some other photo frames. So yeah. Now we come to the main or the most interesting part of the studio, uh, or the process of the studio, which is the neighborhood walks, where we made 3 accordion books, and these accordion books were filled with images of the neighborhood. But the exercise was to walk the neighborhood and start walking, and you don't decide where to go. Basically, you are with a camera and you just move around, and if you feel or like it was totally based on intuition. So so and and these were things that we would not realize something, like we would not get extract out something directly. So we would just walk, we would take photographs, we would make accordion books, we would explain it to him, and he would again go back to okay, try to focus where you are going, and then we would map out, okay, where we went and what objects did we see. And yeah, so some things. And then after, like, the studio was over, I realized that the first accordion book was something that I was most familiar with. So even, and Kaivan didn't mention that you have to categorize these things into, like, he won't give you a strict structure, in a sense that he would explain his exercise very firmly and very clearly. But then we would try to make out, okay, how should I go about this accordion book, or how should I go about that. So yeah. So these were just photographs of my walk from the first neighborhood walk. Again, the second neighborhood walk, and then I would push myself to things that I won't understand. Like, why am I going there, or something like that, or some places that I have not been to. But even then, there were some things that were very up, like I could reach there easily. And then I started understanding that by the third accordion book, I started understanding that I'm trying to poke the skin of my neighborhood. Like, I'm trying to push myself to understand what the boundary is. So by the third accordion book, I was at a place that I had never been to. And I have discovered things that I have never seen before, even though I've lived here for, like, let's say, 25 years. So by the third accordion book, I started realizing what neighborhood means, and what activities comprise where, and how intimate is something to me versus how far away something is for me. So yeah.
And this entire studio, it was an online studio.
It was an online studio.
Yeah, and the transition that I could see, this is actually your own neighborhood in Anand. It was not in
Yes.
Ahmedabad.
Yes.
So every day, how was the experience like on an online studio?
Well, it was very different for me because it was my first time in an online studio. I was thinking it won't be as fun, but it turned out to be completely opposite. And 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 these were some things that, these exercises are not like, you have hardcore efforts to put in. But even then, we made so much effort to do things. We moved around a lot, and it was a time when it was the rainy season. So sometimes you won't be able to go out, and sometimes you would have issues. But even then, it turned out to be really nice, to go out once a while and then come back in to talk about something that you have captured in a photograph, but you don't understand what it means. And even for, as a tutor also, it is a nice exercise to understand what how a student sits in a particular context. The third part of the accordion exercise was the time object in the neighborhood. So we had mapped, or we have captured personal time, but then we started understanding what are the objects of time in the neighborhood. So one of the things you would see in any neighborhood is like overlapping of bills and notices and things like that, and it would just sit there. And yeah, so it's something that basically you go and capture, and you try to understand it if you can, and if you don't, you scrap it out, you try to capture something else. Yeah. So yeah, and these were all about objects, objects in the neighborhood that has been there, but uh, you realize it that it is a common thing in any neighborhood. So how do you figure that out, that this is something that would happen in any neighborhood, or something that happens, or what we know as a neighborhood, we would understand like things or activities that would happen around as time objects.
So this was again for another 2 weeks, or how many weeks were
Yeah, so the neighborhood walks were about 2 to 3 weeks, I guess, and the time objects were really quick, because once we did the neighborhood walk, we would know things, that we never knew before, and then we would start walking again. We know that we might find something here, and try to capture that. So for example, it during these times, everyone is at home, you would start seeing things like, you see here the strange felicitations. So things like that, it's something that you have realized now, and you might capture it if you walk the neighborhood. Yeah, so far we have completed two parts of the studio. The third part is about understanding or developing a language, or understanding what is an architectural idea. So Kaiwan brought in the idea of follies, and it was very new for all of us. Follies is something that is an object that sits in, let's say, a neighborhood, but has no function to it. So you are forced to design a space or an object that has no function. Usually you start with a function, and you go around with the design around a function, but it was something else. It was designing a non-functional thing, which won't host, like, let's say, a residence or something, to host an activity, but it would still be, it would inspire a neighborhood. These objects, like how we saw time objects, these objects would sit in the neighborhood, and they would have their own story. So the red follies were all about neighborhood. They had to be placed in a particular site. We had mapped activities that in the neighborhood. We basically took sites nearby, and we tried to understand what the site means. So the first site was near a very hectic road, a very busy road, and a temple complex, and there was like an abandoned land, or an empty land there. So that land actually is used for festivals like Holi or something, and people would gather there for a very seasonal thing to versus on the sides of the road you would see activities that happen daily, like fruit vendors or food carts, or flower vendors and things like that. So I started thinking about, how do I connect, how do I make a folly that connects the two activities which doesn't exist physically at the same time, but the folly remains at a certain edge where it is, and I had to use an element that justifies what I'm trying to do. So if I am trying to justify a connection between them, a good connector is a staircase in architecture. So basically I used staircase and then a handrail to explain a folly. Yeah, you can go next. Yeah, similarly for another site, it was an abandoned place with garbage spots around it, and there was a bill, like a huge billboard which is not used, it sits there. So my folly was something that wraps around the billboard. And then I started looking at walls, and because the place or the location was a junction between the old city of Anand and the new city. I tried to merge out different compositions of walls, and that you would see like different scales of openings and things like that in the old city of Anand, and try to place it in the junction between the old and the new. Yeah. And third site was actually something that I found luckily, because during that lockdown period and things, the municipality started making this kind of a statue kind of a thing, where like people are walking around and there's like something that bridges out towards a lake. So but the statue was not there. The base was there for the statue, but the statue was not there. So I took advantage of it, and I tried to place my folly where I used a ramp. Now ramp is used for going to a place, or it's not a place, but it takes you to a place. So what I did was my ramp basically hovers above the base of the statue, as if it is an object that you are going to, instead of you are traveling through. So it these were some things that were based on key ideas, and they would just push a good discussion out of it. And they could be, it was not supposed to be very precise or something like that. It had to be something that a graphic that could generate a discussion, basically.
Must be art.
Yeah, now this actually Kaiwan also taught me an elective on how, like, understanding art, and it was about an introduction to art. So by as a like, I don't want to be cunningly, but I mean, I kept this statement just for him to to make fun out of the follies, that if it's not functional, it must be art. So it was something that, how we are doing this podcast. We are basically conversing, and I'm trying to explain it very informally, like a friend. It
Yeah.
was something like that with him also, like within the studio also. Like, we were very open to express ourselves. Again, we then did a key element exercise. We can go through this very fast. So I took so as I said, architectural elements are like dynamic ideas, and they all express something. What does a balcony express? So I chose a topic which was called the political balcony. And it would take me back to the history, where there were wars and things like that, and how it became a political object. From a something which comes from a residential thing, it became a political object. And and like, okay, off the record, like, let's say, the German war, the World War, basically. It started from Germany, and then after the US won basically over Germany, they went and they stood on the same balcony where Hitler used to stand, or announce things, or somebody like a president or something announced the war. So how does the balcony basically become political in the architectural environment? Similarly, balcony is something extra, where different class of people used a balcony differently. Some people who could afford could use it as a swimming pool, while others could use it as a storage space. So balcony is something which is in between both classes. So then we really realized that, balcony is something very public, other than the facade, in comparison to the facade. Yet both are public, but balcony is something that sits in between. It can be something that can be changed, whoever is using it, even though the form is same. And another topic was the social balcony, which I just mentioned.
So by this time, was this already 2 months into the studio project? By this
I think it was just near midsem, where we had like last weeks before the midsem, where when we did the blue folly thing. And yeah, so the blue folly was directly presented on jury day. It was not discussed beforehand. Like, it was discussed beforehand, but the final product or the final design object was directly presented on jury day.
So it was already 3 months down the line.
It was about 2.5 months, yes. About, yeah.
So
Something
all the
like that.
work that we just went through right now was 2.5 months of work.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't know how we worked, but Kaivan was not so strict, but he made us work like anything, like, like, and we would be very happy to work. I mean, I never realized how the time went by. It was like the studio was really amazing.
This is the blue
So,
folly part.
yeah. So the blue folly is now the red folly was about neighborhoods and the site, while the blue folly is about an architectural object, and we took balcony as the object. And then we started taking it to the neighborhood, how and where it would sit as an object to express itself as, something that sits in between both publicness and intimacy. So yeah, and you can skip this, but yeah, for just to understand what kind of balconies are, there in the neighborhood, I started just clicking photographs of, how somebody would be very transparent versus somebody would be very opaque in the term. Someone would make a room out of the balcony. So yeah. The first site was taken as a vegetable market, which is also something where, the cows would graze in the morning, and in the afternoon it would be a parking space. In the morning it would run as the vegetable market. So the space was very, very moving. And then we basically started taking out or extracting out objects out of the balcony, and the terminologies related to it. So yeah, so here I took so it was a very quick exercise. As I said, this was like a 1 week exercise, and I took the the railing as something, as a structure, instead of the balcony as a structure, and then trying to express it with the site itself. And then the second object set between a very famous road and a public park, where there's a cricket ground and things like that. And somehow I by intuition I would always place it at the edge of the site. Like, somehow I would always put it at the edge. It was never like I tried to place it in within the garden or within the public space, but it somehow expressed itself towards the edge of the site. And then in this object I started taking different typologies of balcony, and then if I am on a balcony, what kind of elements wrap around the balcony. And like what, like for me, a balcony is something where I have 2 walls or 3 walls, and then I'm looking somewhere. Versus for somebody else, it would be something else. So yeah, so the area also is something that you talk about. And yeah, so these objects were quick things, like clippings of newspapers. You put them together, make a collage out of it. So the follies actually helped us a lot, because then we started realizing how we should look at an architectural element. Unless and until the folly, like if the follies were not there, we were like, I don't think this project would be possible, because the experimentation, or the exploration that should have been happened, that happened in the folly exercise. And now we come to the final project, which was not the key or the key focus of the studio, but it has to culminate somewhere. So we took a municipal ward as the function. With with it, we started taking smaller functions like a balwadi, and a library space or a reading room. And then I started mapping out where the government bodies are, and what kind of a space it would be. Then there was a discussion how, let's say, for somebody who is living in Rajkot, the river actually cuts the city into two. For me in Anand, the railway line cuts the city into two. So basically what happens is that nobody cross, like, it's the railway line actually cuts the city, and the one which is outside, it remains as something that feels like an outside city, versus what is inside is something where everybody wants to be in, it's the core area of the site, like of the city. So then we started mapping out on mind maps and things like that, how would we approach to the site. And uh, like what would be my site approaches, how so my key ideas were to reuse an existing space in the neighborhood. So it was given to us that we could use public space and an open ground. But we have to be very careful about how we place it, so that the open ground doesn't become something that dies off after our project. So but then when I looked at my neighborhood, I felt that there are not many public spaces that we can see every day. So there are not no, there are only a few public gardens, or where people would go to a walk. So I decided to reuse an existing space in the neighborhood to basically bring out its publicness. And the two sites that I started looking at, was one was an old factory, and the other was an old civil court, which doesn't work right now. So it's an abandoned civil court. And one was in the city, which I'm saying that it was inside the city, which feels like the most key area of the city, while the factory was sitting outside the city, just near the railway line. It's just adjacent to the railway line, but it still feels outside to the city. And the city around it doesn't is not getting developed as much as the city inside. Yeah, so the factory was something like I could see from my balcony, so it was very near to my home. And it was something that I am used to see every day, but I never knew how to go inside or something like that. So it was something to be explored then. And then what I started was that I went to the site, and then I laid down the terminologies of the studio, which was time, public, and architecture. I laid down my ideas about how it could be something like an infrastructure of memory, or like where we could play with the existing facade and carve out spaces from the inside, or something like that. And yeah, the mind map that you see right now is basically the whole conceptual sheet that one would express for the project. Then I started looking at industrial objects, and I I didn't. So we had a discussion on what is a context of a site, and like how should we play with a context such that the project expresses itself universally. It doesn't have to be like a like कि यहाँ पे tree है, it has to be so important, things like that, or it was a mill factory, then it has to be mill objects and things like that. But I took generic objects, industrial objects. What the discussion was about was that how could I use volumes of spaces as a design tool, instead of starting with a plan or starting with a section or things like that of the site, and play with these objects to understand if what if I scale these objects or explode these objects into some parts and place them on site as something that has come out of the factory. So we talked about how the factory would have its own life, the industrial objects would have its own life, and now as the factory is abandoned, um, how these objects need to express itself to the city, and maybe relate to the municipal ward as something that runs the city. So, and everybody had their own discussions. This is very specific to my project. So then there were conceptual planning. We started looking at where the functions would be, but then we it was a dead end. Like it was something that helped me to plan out things, but then I had to go back to that volumetric inquiry, that how would I use these objects as something that might create an architectural language. So then I started using 3D softwares like SketchUp and things to make objects out of it, and then try to extract things out of it and explode things out of it, then place them all together. Now what happened was, with these objects a grid came about, like a cubicle grid below, because I had to connect these objects together. So something that acts as a intertwining thing and connects to all, like it can become its structure, it can become something as a bridge to go to, and yeah, versus these objects remain pure in their form. So these were some conceptual sketches that I did, and for the industrial objects, and I was like uh, and these were some difficult times during studio. I had slowed down because I couldn't get how would I use these objects, how would I use these volumes. And then I was getting into literally using what the curve is. Like somebody would debate, you should use a bolt as a bolt, but then I'm not looking at the form of the bolt, I'm using the volume of the bolt. So then how would I use that volume and then use another element, introduce another element to make a form out of it. So then I used a wall, and a wall which basically, for us in a plan, basically separates out spaces. A wall made a wall for me helped me connect these spaces to wrap these volumes out. And then the volume, the grid that I was talking about, then goes back up and connects to the insides and outsides. And I had introduced, so like that I couldn't, how would I say this, to 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 have its robustness, also with its like pureness of the inquiry that I had. uh the bridge that you saw was something that the bridge that you see is something that came about realizing that I cannot merge these forms in terms of its volumes to just make my space comfortable, to design it very nicely. It had to be something that has to be there, and then you use connectors as a connector, you don't use them as something like to ease your design process. So it was very difficult to understand how these objects would sit, which object would be what, and how would it function all together. Yeah, and the design poster basically came about after the like during the design process, explaining my concept of the language, not the site, not anything else, but the language. and it was all about how, so if you see the poster has dashed lines which has older objects, then the walls basically come about to become the new object, and then the volumes are defined, so the heights of the walls are defined by the volumes of the objects, the industrial objects. And that's how these processes, the small things happen, like collectively became an space that you could, habitualize, or you could live in. Yeah, so then this is the final drawings that you see. This is the first floor plan where you have offices, and um, uh, yeah, so these objects were something, this was not pre-designed, so these walls were something that I saw only in the final drawings. It was not when, like, it was not something that I saw before. So it came about nice, where it had a lot of tweaking and things like that. Even then, even now, I'm struggling with the kind of furniture that would be placed inside. Even this design is not, it's not complete right now. I still have to explore what a furniture means. But yeah, so the key idea is that the municipal ward remains hovering above the site, at the edge of the site, so that the whole um underlying abandoned ground could be used as a public plaza. And the old Folly, which was the old industrial building, is stripped down to its facade, and the facade remains as a key idea, or something that you relate with every day. So yeah. um, yeah. So again, the municipal ward sits right at the edge. How would you design an edge of the site? And the building actually the com- the building composes, the municipal ward composes the edge of the site, and how it connects to what my design process is. And then again, bridges and objects that could connect to various parts of the site and things like that. Again, the public plaza and things were not something that design very detail, like in a very detailed fashion, but it was something like, like, let's take a triangle, or a circle, which is, you would see these basic shapes in an industrial object. You place them on site, how would it be to be in an triangular space versus what would be a cubicle space. And yeah, and again, the balwadi was something that remained a temporary shed, as you would understand, like you would see in industry. Like industry would have a main key building, and then there would be temporary sheds around it. So similarly, how would smaller functions can transform into something else later on. So even if the balwadi could function for something else in the future, so it remains as a temporary shed. The whole idea to keep the municipal ward above helped me to make a public space below. So the site also connected with agricultural land and agricultural institute in Anand. So it was very nearby, and things that we could understand, like how would we extract things out of the site. And then I added a function of a farmers market below, and something that you would always like to have fresh vegetables when you drop your child to balwadi, and in the morning, things like that. So the design process and the requirements also developed with the process. Again, when I went to the city library, people were using it for, as a workspace. Students commuting from different parts of the around the from the villages, they came to Anand, as because it is very famous as an educational city. So now reading rooms are actually used as workspaces. So even smaller follies that you see on the site are like the objects as a reading room, but it can also act as a very personal or intimate space, because it's a sunken space, and the object is like above or something like that, and it basically shed and the articulation of these follies were something taken out of industrial objects, like if you have some like a wheat grinder or something, you would basically take an object, explode it, make it big, and you would see if it could work. And the section also came about too, because and these were things that, so in a normal studio, I would start with a section, and I would start with a plan, but actually I ended with a plan. I ended with a section in at the end of the studio, and it was completely different. It helped me understand how my design process is, how could it transform according to the site, or the language that you are trying to explore. And then obviously you always have to you always have to stick with your language, or you should have fun in the studio. So I took humans as bots, and I use Star Wars and things like that to express like that. Ye chota wala kaun hai? I forgot. uh, I forgot. Wally. Yes, I used Wally many times because these were things to have fun with. It's okay if you don't use real humans. You have to understand how your space would be. And an object that is mobile, which is a living object, versus an object that remains permanent. And these trees, so I never emphasized on trees, but it was something that was discussed as a byproduct, that my building remains very like a rustic thing, or something that is very like an industrial uncomfortable object, but the trees grow around them as the time passes. So then you always have this the essence of time like move through the site. Yep, that's it.
Wow. I just feel I have to clap for such a monumental amount of work. So much of research and design, exhaustive design processes, and even the drawings are superb. The presentation was amazing. There's a beautiful narrative to the entire project, and I was really connecting all the dots from the start to the end when you're talking about, you know, the research that you did on those case studies, and then those follies, and then those spaces, and the entire theme of time, public, and architecture. I'm seeing this in your project at the end, and I can really imagine this this project shaping out, being tested in time, in the due course of time. And it's so thought evoking, like, evokingly, is like it brings you so many thoughts to think about, and such an interesting project, and I feel so definitely a well deserved excellence award that you've received on this project. But
Thank you.
amazing. Thank you so
Yep,
much for this
the whole design
presentation.
process, the whole design process was an uncomfortable thing. It's not that I like something that I was used to, but the whole exploration of things, it was all about that. I don't like, I'm not very fond of the product that has come out, but I was really happy about the process that I went through. So and a fun fact that I wanted to share was, for excellence award, we had these juries after we got shortlisted, and we had 7 minutes to explain our project. And in the whole time, I just explained my process of the studio, and I never went into my final project. I never explained my final project, and it was like it was something that happened, but I was not expecting an award for it, because I never explained my final, so-called final product, but everybody understood what the studio was about, and the process that it went through. And I think I should thank to all my friends, because they started, like, you you need an environment to work in, and all my colleagues helped make that environment. And of course to Kaiwan and Siddharth, who were just amazing. I cannot say more. Like, they were just amazing to give this opportunity to us.
When I first heard about the studio that Kaiwan was taking it up, I was really amused. I really wanted to know what the studio would be about. And it is so well and beautifully structured. The entire studio was designed in such a beautiful way. And I think the final it's not really about the final product like you were saying. It's about the process and this inquiry, this exploration of all these different aspects. And I'm sure these will inform you in the future as well, in your other projects as well. And that's the more important thing. But I'm just blown off when I seeing your projects. It was so fascinating, and not for a moment I was like, I just wanted you to pause for a moment because I really want, like, we're like really short of time, but we could really discuss about this project at length. At and imagine, and you were just saying you only had like 7 minutes to present all of this. Yeah.
Yeah.
How many people were there in the studio?
So there were about 14 of us.
14 of you. I think it's a good size. It's a good size, because I think that's how you get quality conversations when you have a limited number of students like that. Was
I
any,
think even Kaiwan focuses on that thing. Like, our general studio times, we would discuss only 5 minutes. Individual discussion would end up only 5 minutes. Then he would talk about like 15, 20, or 30 minutes, and that's it. And we would talk every day. Like, we would discuss every day so that everyone is in a certain momentum. And then he would give us like a jury for, where we could say or talk for 30 minutes. And it was just it was very difficult, like, from, because a 5 minute discussion, we have to be very focused on, what we want to say, what changes we did. And even for the tutor, he had been so involved with us, that even though if I just do a smaller change, he would know that I don't have to mention it every time, that, oh sir, I have made a section, I have made this. It was just amazing. Like, yeah, the interaction was really amazing. And obviously, as I've told you before, the juries and everything was something which was not like a formal thing to do. Like, as I explained you in this podcast, I my juries were also similar. And like, we did night juries and things like that. And it was just amazing to be a part of this studio.
yeah, you were telling that you had a studio which started at 7 in the night and it went all the way till 12 in
Yeah,
the midnight.
the night final jury started at 7 at the night, and and yeah, it ended at like 12 or 12:30.
Yeah.
So our jurors were Nandita Korea, and she was abroad. So
And
we had
time.
this night jury, this opportunity to do a night jury.
What were her comments on your project, Nandita? From Nandita?
Like, should I be on record?
Yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
Okay, so well, like, I was very informal with while explaining this. So the two jurors were Nandita Korea and Madhav Raman. And Madhav had been in our mid-sem jury also, so he actually knew where we are going, and the first two juries were a little dicey. I was a little shaken up, because Nandita was a little strict on them. But then suddenly, I don't know, man, I had not prepared anything. I was just with this presentation, and I was talking as if I'm talking to you. And Nandita just melted down. She was just very glad to see the project, and how I explained, like, how the bridges would be used as informal, like, smoking zones or something that you see in everyday buildings, like how would I understand a space in that sense. So yes, she was really happy to see the project. And and even Madhav was like, yeah, he told me in the end that he has to visit Anand, like, to see the neighborhood. And he was just glad to how we explained our from neighborhoods to the design project. And yeah, so I guess, yeah, like, even the excellence award jury, the comments were, it was a great presentation and things like that. But for me, the best jury was the final jury, where I was just in very informal, like, never done before. It was a night jury, and uh, we were conversing like, like normal people. It was not something like, yeah, very formal. So it was really nice.
Did you get any particular criticism on your project?
Yeah, Madhav told me that I'm still backing down somewhere or the other while making, let's say, an exhibition space or an information space in the ground floor. And he would say, I don't have to make these things. Sometimes a space would be there. You don't have to explain why that space is there. And he was like, don't back down on things to be as robust as you have been in the design process. And he was right about it. Even in terms of material and things, I could just follow the dots that I have been following, and I don't have to sidetrack about it. So yeah.
And anything from non?
Well, they were both happy to see that I have used Corbusier's modular everywhere, and they were like, it's just now the modular is just useful for these human figures. It's like they were making fun out of it, but they were like, really happy to see that the whole language, or even when I talked about the bots instead of the humans and things like that, it just happened intuitively. Like, you do it, and it's not something like, you have to think about it. And you play with your drawings, you play with your models and things like that, and you come out with a good result. So so I think it was a good exploration to do drawings like that. And it was just fun.
What were Kaiwan's final comments on your project?
Arre, it's difficult to explain. I mean, he knows how the design came about. And when he explained to somebody else, like, he didn't comment in the final jury, but during the excellence awards, he was also explaining his studio. So and he explained that, even I didn't realize how much unrealized industrial heritage is there in my city. And because Anand is famous for Amul and other things. And the city has been that, like, the building that reused was there in 1960s. So there is a certain heritage that is very like, that has been very unrealized in the city by everyone. Even you see in my neighborhood walks and things. Yeah, I don't focus on industrial objects or things like that. So basically, he was happy to see that something something unrealized has came about from the project.
Well, I have no words. I enjoyed your project thoroughly. Thank you so much for presenting this project on this particular channel. I'm sure a lot of people are going to enjoy this presentation. I'm sure many more will be inspired from it as well. And it's a great opportunity for us to learn and share from other colleges, from other studios, from other tutors like this. And thank you so much, Rich, for doing this.
Thank you.
I'm gonna.
I just wanted to make a comment that, these medias, podcast and things like that, help us relook at what we have done. Like, I participated with you because it helps me relook at my work also. These things, and it helps me connect with you and connect with many other people, and I hope that other people too connect back um, with everyone else. Yeah.
On that note, thank you so much for doing this episode with me.